All right, Shabbos say good morning. Let us begin. And thank you to Maishi for handling all of our technical issues as we Baruch Hashem. Always something wonderful. Baruch Hashem. All right. So with that, let us begin. So we begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Naftoli and Chava Tilson from Eretz Yisroel, with a special thank you from Naftoli to his chaver, Benjamin Wohl, for introducing to the Daf Yomi. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with the shiur together in Eretz Yisroel with much hakaras hatov. Thank you. To Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin, thank you for dedicating the shiurim this month. And this chus, may Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel, and may all of our children remain safe and complete their year of learning with a deep connection to the land and Hashem's Torah. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Alan and Sherry Steinmetz, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Alan's mother, Chaya Bas Reb Meir, and to Jeff and Debbie Schwartz for a successful procedure and complete recovery. We thank all of our sponsors for their continued support of the Torah and our Kilan and Meretz Hashem. May be Zocha that our Torah should provide an aliyah for all the neshamas, a refuah to all those who need one, and a nechama to all the mishpachas. With that, let us begin. Does this sound okay? Yeah. What? Yeah. Okay. Okay. If you have, you could suggestions at suburbanorthodox.org. We monitor it very carefully. Jeremy Lass and Maishi Abramson really are constantly on this. It's good. Okay. I can't see the Gemara, but that's all right. Don't worry about it. It should be all right. Should be okay. This is my, I've done this before. All right. Good? How's this? Okay. La la la. Okay. So let's begin. Today's daf is Mabez. I want to thank Rav Kalman and Kiva for giving shiur yesterday. I know you got, Baruch Hashem, you got a little bit onto Mabez, but we're actually going to back up a little bit just to start the sugya on the bottom of Mem Aleph Amud Beis. We're going to pick up with 3 lines up from the bottom. Ki asa Rab Dimi Am Rab Yochanan. So an interesting discussion over here regarding the various times in which we have to use red wool. So Ki asa Rab Dimi Am Rab Yochanan. Shalosh Lashonos Shamati. I've heard that Lashonos, which again are pieces of red wool, are used in 3 different contexts. Achal Shapara, Va'achal Shalsar Mishlai, Va'achal Shamatzora. One time in the Paraduma, one time in the Seir HaMishtaleach, the goat that is sent out to the wilderness on Yom Kippur, and one time for Mitzora. 3 different times in which we use red wool. Achos Mishkal Asara Zuz, one time the weight of the wool is 10 zuz. Achos Mishkal Shnei Sloim, one time the weight of the wool is 2 sloim. Va'achos Mishkal Shekel, and one time the weight of the wool is a shekel. However, Rav Dimi said, Rabbi Yochanan, Ve'im Mefarish, but I don't know which wool is which weight. Kiyasa Rabin, when Rabin came along, Pirsha Mishad Rabbi Yochanan, he explained it as follows. Top of Mebez Abosai. Here we go. Shalpara Mishkal Asara Zuz. Interesting enough, according to this approach, the weight, or I should say the red wool used for the Para Aduma is the heaviest shiur, 10 zuz. Now why is that? Rashi points out over here, Shalpara Mishkal Asar Zuz, Debaya Kovet. It was because we saw in yesterday's daf that it is not enough to simply go ahead and insert the red wool into the fire, right, in which you're burning the ashes and everything else of the paraduma, but you must make sure that that wool sinks into the fire, right? The Gemara discussed that if the wool ends up getting singed or burned by the pieces of fire that shoot up, that may be problematic in the paraduma service. So therefore, the wool used for the paraduma has to be heavy so that it sinks into the fire. Shapara mishkal asar zuz, v'shal sar mishtaleach mishkal shnei sloim. Sir mishtaleach has a weight of 2 sloim. Why 2 sloim? Rashi points out over here, debaya chaluka mishkal shnei sloim v'daya bekach. Because ultimately, the wool of the sir mishtaleach, we haven't discussed this yet, but we will get into this. That piece of wool has to be divided into 2. One part of it is tied between the horns of the Sira Mishtaleach, the goat, and we'll see another part of it is actually tied to a rock by the edge of the cliff. We're actually going to see is actually three pieces of red wool because one piece is actually strung up by the Beis Hamikdash itself. But in any event, Sira Mishtaleach requires 2 slaim, v'shal mitzora mishkal shekel. And for the mitzora, all you need is the weight of a shekel. Because I will say, at the end of the day, so the Mitzorah does not require weight like the Para Aduma, nor does it require ultimately being split into two, like this here Mishtalech. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Pligi bar Reb Shimon chalafta v'Rabbanan b'Para. So Rabbi Yochanan comes along and says, Reb Shimon chalafta and Rabbanan argue in the case of Para Aduma. Chad amar mishkal asara v'chad amar mishkal shekel. So we'll say, interestingly enough, in this version over here, the machlokis by Para Aduma is a machlokis of extremes. One opinion says that the weight of the red wolf of Para Aduma is 10 zuz, which was the heaviest shiur, and one opinion said that it was a shekel, which was the smallest shiur, the lightest amount. V'simonach, and the way to remember it is echad hamarba ve'echad hamamit. So the way to remember this is, again, Rashi points out over here, v'simin, first last Y line in Rashi, shelotite lomar she'echad haya omer mishkal shnei slaim mishnazu tehei lecha simon. So we'll say the way to remember this is a Mishnah in Menachos, where the Mishnah says echad hamarba ve'echad hamamit ubilvad she'echavin libo lashamayim. The Mishnah, the Gemara says in Maseches Menachos, we're dealing with different sacrificial obligations which depend on your financial standing. So the halacha is whether you bring a lot or whether you bring a little. The ikar is that your heart is dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bilvad she'echavin libo lashamayim. B'simin zeh Tizkar Lama. So we'll say this is a good way to remember this machlokis over here by Para Aduma. One opinion says the wool has to have the weight of 10 zuz. The other opinion says the wool only has to have the weight of a shekel. Those are the extremes. Echad hamarbe, the highest or the greatest amount of red wool, the most weight, the least amount of weight, good. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti Ravina. Lo b'para pligi, ela b'sir mishtalech pligi. Interesting, for Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti said to Ravina, their machlokes is not regarding the weight of the red wool by Para Aduma, but rather, again, because we'll say the Gemara will suggest now that everyone will agree by Para Aduma that you need to have 10 zuz, because by Para Aduma you need the red wool to be heavy. You need it to sink to the bottom of the fire. I say, where is the machlokes? Lo pligi ella b'ser mishtaleach pligi. I'm sorry, lo ella b'ser mishtaleach pligi. Rather, we'll say, where's the machlokes? The machlokes is in the case of seir ha-mishtaleach. How heavy, ultimately, again, does the wool of the seir mishtaleach have to be? Vahu Yoma, and on the day where they have this machlokes regarding the weight of the wool for the seir mishtaleach, nach nafshe de Rabia bar Kisi. So Rabia bar Kisi passed away. Rashi points out over here, Rabia bar Kisi was Shem Chacham, was a particular Talmud Chacham. So he passed away on the day that they were having the machlokes regarding the weight of the red wool for the seir mishtaleach. So the Gemara says, how do you remember this? Simna Rabia bar Kisi mechaber kisir mishtaleach. And the way they remembered this was that Rabia bar Kisi, his death was mechaper, was atoned just like the seir mishtaleach atoned. The Rashi points out over here, mechaper, what does this mean? Misas tzadikim mechaperes, ki da'amar ba'alma, lama nismucha misas aron lebigdei kohuna, lomar lecha ma bigdei kohuna mechaperim af misas tzadikim mechaperes. Sabah said the Gemara, Rashi quotes the Gemara Maseches Moed Katan, where the Gemara espouses this fascinating idea of misas tzadikim mechaper, the death of the righteous atones. First of all, interestingly enough, where do we learn this concept from? So Rashi points out over here the fact that the death of Aaron is juxtaposed to the section of the Bigdei Kahuna, Kohanic clothing. And the Gemara learns out from there, just like Kohanic clothing provides atonement, so too the death of the righteous provides atonement as well. So we'll say this is an interesting concept. What does it mean that the death of the righteous provides atonement? So first of all, it's interesting because this concept is manifest in other religions, right? So remember, again, other religions, you have this concept that someone's death atones for all of humanity. And in general, we generally assume that atonement has to be achieved by each and every individual on their own. In other words, I can't achieve kapara for you, you can't achieve kapara for me. So what's the pshat? Misas tzadikim mechaber. So if Aaron Yitzchak Kohen Cook, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh Avracha, has a beautiful insight into this. And he explains that the concept of misas tzadikim mechaper means that people often don't know the full measure of a tzaddik until he passes away, because part of the midos of a righteous person is tznius, is a certain level of modesty. So tzaddikim do not broadcast their good deeds. So where does the full scope, or when does the full scope of their piety become manifest? When does it become known? Only after they pass away. People only know the true greatness of tzaddikim in their death. Once I know the greatness of the tzaddik, then ultimately, again, that tzaddik becomes a role model for me, because now I know the full scope of their piety. So if Cook says, it's not the pshat that the death of the tzaddik brings about kapara, but it's because through the death of the tzaddik, I get to really know the tzaddik, and once I really know the tzaddik, I can engage in emulation of the tzaddik. And the fact that everyone now wants to emulate the tzaddik, because now I've learned of the greatness of the tzaddik, that in and of itself brings kapara. But perhaps there's another pshat as well. I mentioned this before. The Gemara has a great line. The Gemara says, Keder debe shutfi, a pot that belongs to partners, that belongs to two people, never really gets hot and never really gets cold. Right? It never gets hot. Why? Because each guy assumes the other person is taking care of it. So perhaps the pshat in Misas Tzaddikim Mechaper is like this. When the tzaddik is in the world, everyone assumes the tzaddik will get it done. Tzaddik will get it done. I don't have to worry about it. Baruch Hashem, whatever the it is. I don't have to worry about communal problems. I don't have to worry about global problems. I don't have to worry about Kamisah problems. The tzaddik is here. The tzaddik is here. The tzaddik will take care of it. When the tzaddik dies and people realize that there is a huge void in the world, right? With the passing of a tzaddik, there is a huge void, a huge emptiness of Kedusha. What happens when people realize that void? Everyone realizes, I have to step up. I have to step up. I have to do my part. The tzaddik is no longer here to be able to pull all of the weight on his own, so I have to step up. So perhaps that's the pshat. Misas tzaddikim mechaper. Again, it's not the pshat that the death of the tzaddik brings about atonement, but when the tzaddik dies and people realize, my gosh, there's no one here to pull the weight on their own, I have to do my part. Now, of course, I have to do my part even when the tzaddik is alive. Right? We all have to do our part. We all have to contribute in some meaningful way, whether it's to our mishpachas, whether it's to our kehilos, to our communities, and to our nation, to our world. But human nature is such that when I think that someone else is there to do the job, I feel exempt from pitching in. But once the tzaddik is gone, and I realize that void is there, then suddenly everyone realizes the urgency to step up. And that urgency to step up, and everyone stepping up, that in and of itself creates the kapara. Am Rabbi Yitzchak, Shtei Shchito Shamati. So both say, the Gemara Rabbi Yitzchak says, it's really great Gemaras. I heard that there are two shchitos, Acha Shel Para v'Acha Shel Paro. One is the shchita of the Para Aduma, that's Para Aduma, and one is the shchita of Paro. This is the bull of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Achos Ksheira Bizar v'Achos Psula Bizar. And I heard that one of them can be shechted by a zar, a non-Kohen, and one of them can't be shechted by a non-Kohen. There's only one problem. V'lo yedana heminayu. And Rabbi Yitzchak says, I just don't remember which is which. Right? So isn't this great? So there are two paras, Para Aduma, Para of Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippur. One of them is Ksheira Bizar, can be shechted by a non-Kohen. I just don't remember which one is which. Says Dimar, let's analyze. Itmar, Shchitas, Para, Uparo. So the Shchita, the Para Aduma, and the Para of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur. Rav Shmuel Chad Amar, Para Psula, Paro Ksheira. So one opinion said, if a zar shechts the Para Aduma, it is possible. But if the zar shechts the Para of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, it's kasher. The Chad Amar, Paro Psula, Para Ksheira. And the other opinion said that no, if a zar shechts the Para of Yom Kippur, it's possible. But if a zar shechts Para Aduma, it's kasher. So says the Gemara, Tistayim dirav huda amar Para Psula. So the Gemara says, I just want to tell you, I think it's clear that Rav is the one who's of the opinion that although a zar can shecht the Para of Yom Kippur, a zar, a non-Kohen, cannot shecht the Para Aduma. How do we know that? Dam Rabbi Zera, Shchitas Para Bizar Psula. Rabbi Zera said that the shchita of the Para Aduma by a zar is possible. Va'amar Rav Allah. So Va'amar Rav Allah. Elazar v'chuka shaninuba. And we'll say Rav commented on this, that why is it that ultimately a non-Kohen cannot shecht a para aduma? Because by para aduma it says Elazar and chuka. Those two words. We'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Shel Elazar v'chuka. Elazar ksiv ba unisatem osa el Elazar hakohen uksiv zos chukas haTorah v'chol heicha dichsiv chuka ikuvo. So we'll say two things happening over here. Wherever the Torah uses the word chuka, an everlasting statute, that means that the particular service that's being mentioned or discussed must be done in this way, and you cannot deviate. And if you deviate, ultimately you render the service unfit. So by para aduma it says Elazar. Right? Elazar is the son of Aaron, is a Kohen. So the Torah goes out of its way to say para aduma must be done by a Kohen. And it says chuka. Chuka means if it's not done by a Kohen, then what? Then Allah Chalamaisa, the para aduma is pasul. So we'll see from here that Rav holds that a para aduma shechted by a zar is pasul, which would then lead us to believe that Rav would hold that paro, the par of Yom Kippur, although it's good to be shechted by a Kohen, if it's not shechted by a Kohen, ultimately it is still kosher. So the Gemara says, Rav, Maishna para dechsev be'elazar v'chuka. So what now we've established, according to Rav, why is it that a zar can't shecht para aduma? Because the Torah uses the lashon of Elazar and chuka. Paro nami ksiv Aaron v'chuka. But one second. By Yom Kippur, by the power of Yom Kippur, it also says the lashon of Aaron, right? It says Aaron and Chuka. So we'll say using that same logic, the same way that it says Elazar and Chuka by Paraduma, and that teaches me that what? Paraduma must be forever done by a Kohen, and if it's done by a Zar, it's pasul. So to the presence of the words Aaron and Chuka by part of Yom Kippur should also teach you that halacha lamaisa, if a zar shechts the part of Yom Kippur, it should be possible. Yet Rav is saying that's not the case. So what's the pshat? Rav will answer, shchit olav avodihi. It's not a problem because what's in Yom Kippur, only the avoda has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. But anything that's not avoda, ultimately again can be done even by a zar. And shchita is not avoda. Shchita is not avoda, to which the Gemara says, Ihachi paranami. I don't understand. Okay, so if shchita is not avoda, then the shchita of paraduma is also not avoda. And if the shchita of paraduma is not avoda, then what? It should be kshera bizar as well. And yet, Rav is saying that what? Rav is saying that by paraduma, a Kohen must do the shchita, but yet ultimately, again, why? Because we'll also just follow the argument over here. Rav is saying by paraduma, Kohen must do the shchita. Why? Presence of two words. What two words? Elazar chuka. So the Gemara says, oh, 1 second, Yom Kippur it says Aaron and chuka. No, you don't need a Kohen by Yom Kippur because shchita is not an avoda. Okay, if shchita is not an avoda, then shchita by paraduma is also not an avoda. So why do I need a dafka to be a Kohen? To which the Gemara says, shiny para, the kadshe bedek habayisi. Para aduma says, fascinating answer. Para aduma is different because, interestingly enough, para aduma doesn't have the status of a carbon. Quite fascinating. Now, the truth is, we already know this. How do we know that para aduma is not a carbon? How do you know? Excellent. It's not shechted on the Beis Hamikdash. Remember, again, it's shechted on Har HaMishcha. It's shechted on Har HaZayis. It's shechted across the valley, right? On the next mountain over from Har HaBayis. But we'll say, if that was a carbon, that would be a big no-no. That's called shchutei chutz. You cannot shecht karbanos outside of the Beis Hamikdash. So interestingly enough, if para aduma is not a carbon, so what is it? To which the Gemara says, it's kadshe bedek habayis. Now, we'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Shiny part, right across in Rashi. Mamish, right across. Shiny part, the kadshe bedek habayisi. Kilomar, ein ba kidushas hamizbeach, ela kidushas dam ba'alma. But say this is fascinating. So para aduma does not have sacrificial sanctity. What does para aduma have? It has monetary sanctity. Really quite fascinating. It's called Kiddushas Damim Ba'alma, Shai Shchitasa B'Hara Mishcha, because after, as we just mentioned, you shecht the para aduma on Hara Mishcha, but Hara Mishcha is Hara Zesim, right? On the Mount Olives. Hilchach, Ein Sad Avodos Nechlokes Ba, V'chol Avodos Shaveh. So say, this is so fascinating. Para aduma is not a carbon. It's not a carbon. So what's the kedusha para aduma? kadshe bedek habayis. It has financial sanctity. Because it has financial sanctity, all parts of the paraduma service are treated equally. There's no distinction between the services. They're all equal. And therefore, again, because they're all equal, once it says Elazar and Chuka, therefore, what does that teach me? What does that teach me? Every part of para aduma has to be done by the Kohen. Interestingly enough, by the par of Yom Kippur, what's the status of the par of Yom Kippur? What is that? What is that? It's a carbon. It's a carbon. Oh, once you get into the realm of carbonos, we'll say, then what? Then we're able to distinguish between parts that are avoda and parts that are avoda. We'll say, it's so counterintuitive, right? What the Gemara is saying over here is, once again, paraduma is not a carbon. Para aduma is kadshe bedek havayis, financial sanctity. Because it's financial sanctity, every aspect of the para aduma has the same status. So how do I treat it? Oh, Elazar Chuka teaches me that every part of it has to be done by a Kohen. But ultimately, again, by the para of Yom Kippur, that's a carbon. People say, we already know by carbonos, not every avoda is the same. Or for that matter, not everything has the status of avoda. For example, by karbanos, what doesn't have the status of avoda? Shchita. Excellent. Shchita. And therefore, again, Rav posits that by paraduma, the shchita has to be done by a kohen. Not because by paraduma even the shchita is an avoda. Just the opposite. By paraduma, nothing's an avoda. It's all kodshe bedek habayis. It's exeris hakasav of Elazar and Chuka. It all has to be done by a kohen. But by part of Yom Kippur, it is avoda, and therefore shchita is kshera bizarre. General, both say the halachas of karbanos is that you can have shchita done by non-kohen. Therefore, even the part of Yom Kippur, the shchita will be done by non-kohen. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, "V'lav kol dechenu." So the Gemara says, "I don't understand." But shouldn't that advance the exact opposite argument? Look at Rashi. V'lav kol dechenu b'tmiyah. Ashchitas paro dikdushas hagufi lo ksiba chuka v'ashchitas paro ksiba chuka mifsala bizar. So I will say, I don't understand. Shouldn't it be just the opposite? In other words, that if you're going to tell me that para aduma, which only has financial sanctity, requires a kohen, so then shouldn't the para of Yom Kippur, which has carbonic sanctity, certainly require a kohen? To which the Gemara says, "Lav chol d'cheinu Amar Rav Shisha Reid Rav Idi midi dahavi amaros negoim." Dalav avodahi ubaya kahuna. So we'll say this is very interesting. So Shishrei Dravidi says like this. Apparently, we'll say this is really quite novel. The Gemara wants to compare paraduma to maros negoim. It's fascinating. I'll say, what's maros negoim? Person is afflicted with a lesion. They have to go to, right, who do they have to go to for a tzaras determination? The Kohen. Right, you have to go to the Kohen. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. So what's Maras Negoim? Is Maras Negoim Avoda? Is it Avoda? No. What is it? It's just a process. It's a process. But it's a process which by definition requires a Kohen and no one other than a Kohen. So we'll say, this is really quite interesting. What Rav is introducing us to, it's just fascinating that essentially it's a new construct. It's a new construct. So essentially, there's karbanos, and then there are processes, right? We'll call it kohanic processes. So as kadosh and as holy as karbanos are, there's room to say in the realm of karbanos, there are certain things that have to be done by kohanim, and other things that don't have to be done by kohanim. And then there are processes, and although the processes themselves may not possess the same level of kiddusha as karbanos, there are processes which could only be done by kohanim. Paul says, here's a perfect example. Maros nigoim. Is maros nigoim, is that avoda? Is that avoda? No, it's not avoda at all. Again, it's a process, but it's a process which must be done by a kohen. Rav is suggesting that halacha l'maisa, paraduma falls into the same category as maros nigoim. See, interestingly enough, on a kiddush table, I think we're trained to think that the higher the level of Kedusha requires who? A Kohanim, right? So in other words, the higher the Kedusha, the more you can only use Kohanim. The Gemara is just saying, there's truth to that statement, but there's also just a different construct. There are just certain processes. It's almost supposed to say, if you need something notarized, if you need like lahabdil, if you need something notarized, the only person who could do that for you is A notary, but I'm a Talmid Chacham, right? I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm accomplished, whatever your life accolades are. Shkoyach. I just need a notary. Right? It's not a function. So what the Gemara is saying is there are certain processes that by definition require Kohanim. It's not a function of Kedusha. It's just, so therefore Rav wants to make this fascinating suggestion. The power of Yom Kippur, if a Zar does the Shechita, the power is kosher. But Para Aduma requires a Kohen throughout the entire process. Why? Because Para Aduma is Kadshe Bedek Habayis. It's not even Kadshe Aguf, it's not even Karbanic, it's just the process. Just like Maros Negoim, the process requires Kohanim. Incredible. So we'll say, this is the position of Rav. So Rav holds that Allah Lamaisa, Para Aduma must be done. Para Aduma must be done by a Kohen, every single part of it. Where do we learn that out from? Elazar Chukah, just remember that, Elazar Chukah. But Para of Yom Kippur, Shechita is Ksheira Bizar. Now Shmuel. Shmuel Damar Paro Psula. So we'll say Shmuel holds that no, Halacha Lamaisa Shmuel holds that the Shechita, the Para Aduma, can be done by a non-Kohen, but the Para of Yom Kippur must be done by a Kohen. And if a non-Kohen does it, ultimately he invalidates the carbon. We'll say it's very exciting Gemara, no? Yeah, I'm trying to see if it's just the microphone that I'm not feeling the excitement. The microphone or the air conditioning, the Zoom, there's too much going. Do you remember when we just used to have shiur? You'd come into the base medrash and it wasn't this and this and this and this. All right, one day we'll Shmuel da Amar. So I'll say back to Shmuel. The Shmuel da Amar, Paro Psula. Maishno Paro. So we'll say according to Shmuel, who holds that Allah Lamaisa, if a Zar does the Shechita of the Para of Yom Kippur, he invalidates the Par. Maishna Paro. Why is the Par of Yom Kippur different? Tichsiv Aron v'chuka. So we'll say it's the reverse limud. So Shmuel will say very simple. By Par of Yom Kippur it says Aron, namely again it has to be a Kohen. And Abbas remember again, what does the word chuka teach us? Right? 2 words. Everlasting statute. Just borrowed that from our school, right? Everlasting statute. Right? So I'll say, so again, at the end of the day, that means this is an immutable law that does not change. It always has to be Aaron. It always has to be Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara says, so Mashna Paro Dichsiv Aaron V'chuka, Par Nami Haksiv Elazar V'chuka. But 1 second. Shmuel, if you're going to learn out that by the power of Yom Kippur, it always has to be a Kohen Gadol. Because it's Aaron and Chukah, by Paraduma it says Elazar and Chukah. So why don't you do the same thing by Paraduma? It also always has to be a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, no. Shiny Hasam, by Paraduma it's different because it says, Dichsiv, V'shachat osa lefanov. By Paraduma it says, you shall shecht the Para Aduma in front of Elazar. So what does that teach you? Shehezar shochet ve'elazar roa. Both say teaches us that what? That ultimately, again, Shmuel says it teaches us that a non-Kohen could shecht, and Elazar has to be supervising. So interestingly enough, same words. But again, Einachinami, so again, Shmuel will say, I learn out that the Par of Yom Kippur has to be done by a Kohen. Why? Aaron Chukah. I asks the Gemara, by Paraduma you have Elazar Chukah. True, but by Paraduma you have another pasuk. V'shachat osa lefanov. You shall shecht the carbon in front of Elazar, which shows you that Elazar could supervise Shechita. So what does Rav do with this? What does Rav do? V'shachat osa lefanov. V'Rav shelo yasiach daito mimena. Both say this is fascinating. Rav says that v'shachat osa lefanov teaches me that halacha l'maisa in the preparation of the paraduma, there could be no hesech hadas. Otherwise, Rabbi say, you cannot get distracted. If you look at Rashi says of Rav, li'olam elazar shakta u'may lefanav shelo yasiach taito mishmirasa. So we'll say, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, no hesech hadas. So we'll say, this is incredible. This is absolutely incredible. We'll say, Rav says, in order for the paraduma to be kosher, there cannot be a lapse of awareness. You see, Rabbi say, in the realm of Kedusha, the moment you take your eye off the road, the moment you go ahead and you have a lapse of awareness, is the moment everything comes tumbling down. Rabbi say, what an incredible metaphor for life Kedusha in general. We all know this from our own lives. You start on something in life, right? You go out, you start a particular project, you start a particular initiative, you want to engage in some course correcting activity, you just want to turn things around, and you're doing great. And then what happens? The moment you have Hesach Hadas, oh look, what is that? Right? The moment you have Hesach Hadas, right? The moment you get distracted is the moment everything falls apart. You'll say it's not right, I got distracted for one moment. It's not fair, you're right, but that's just the way that life works. So I think about this just even in the way you day, right? Person has, hopefully we start our days with a list of things we want to accomplish, right? And you're doing great. You're going through that list, I'm accomplishing. And then what happens? You allow yourself to get distracted by one thing, right? One meme, one, is it GIF or GIF? It's machlokas? GIF. Okay. Right. One. See, now I just distracted you, by the way. Now you totally forgot about Rabbi Shmuel also. I was going to say, one GIF or one phone call that I just didn't need to take right now. And what happens? It derails everything. It's an incredible yesod in life that if you want to be successful in anything, there must be awareness and an avoidance of a lapse of concentration. Almost like a laser-like precision on what I have to accomplish, and don't get distracted until you finish. So Rav says, V'shachat osa lefanav teaches me that I need to remain focused on the para aduma, and I cannot get distracted by anything else, and if there is distraction, then halacha l'maisa that invalidates the para. So the Gemara says, Shmuel, shelo yasiach daito minale, where does Shmuel learn out this halacha? That you can't have hesach hadas. That you can't have a lapse of awareness. You must be fully concentrated on the para aduma. Nafkale mi v'saraf esapar le'enov. This is very interesting. So he learns it out from the phrase, and he shall burn the para aduma le'enov, in front of his eyes. In other words, so Rav learns out that what does it mean that? Shmuel learns out. Shmuel learns out. Shmuel learns out that you have to have constant concentration from the fact that the Torah says you shall burn the para aduma in front of his eyes. In front of his eyes means concentration, no lapse of awareness throughout the entire process. So Rav will say, Einachinami, the Torah teaches us this concept of concentration and avoidance of lapse of awareness in two areas. V'Rav chad b'shchita v'chad b'sreifa. They will say this is fascinating. Rav says the Torah teaches me the need for concentration on para aduma in two places. One by shchita and one by the actual burning of the para. And I need both. Why tzricha? Because if the Torah would have just said which teaches me that I have to concentrate on the para aduma during the shchita, I can't have a lapse of awareness, I would have said, it's dafka by shchita that you can't have a lapse of awareness. Why not? Because that's the beginning of the avodah. So I will say, Hakol holech achar ha'aschala. Everything is determined by the beginning. So of course you can't have a lapse of awareness at the beginning. But maybe once you're past the beginning, even if you lose concentration a little bit, you're okay. Therefore, I'm going to have asreifa imalo. Maybe by the time you get to asreifa, you don't have to have perfect, undiluted attention, to which the Gemara says, the imalo, therefore tzricha. Therefore, the Torah goes out of its way to say, v'saraf osa. What was the lashon of the pasuk? V'saraf esapar le'inav. Therefore, the Torah says, not only do you have to have complete awareness at the beginning by shchita, but you must maintain that complete awareness all the way through the process to the point where ultimately, again, you are burning the para as well. Because of Rachmana b'sreifa, if the Torah would have just taught me the awareness obligation by sreifa, mishum dahashta hu demiskashra para. Because it will say it's at the time of the sreifa where what? Where mamish, like the para aduma finally becomes fit to use. Because I will say, remember again, what part of the para do you use for the para aduma service? The ashes. So it's the sreifa that mamish makes it into ashes. So maybe that's dafka where I have to have complete awareness. But shchita, even if I'm a little distracted, it's not the biggest deal. Therefore, against sreifa. So I will say, interesting, according to Rava, so Joe said, I just want to point out, both Rav and Shmuel, not Rava, but both Rav and Shmuel are agreeing that you require awareness for the process of the para aduma. The machlokes is just exactly where you're learning it out from. And interesting enough, according to Rav, the Torah goes out of its way by para aduma to teach you the awareness obligation or the awareness mandate in two places, both by shchita beginning and by sreifa the end. So says the Gemara, if that's the case, limi utemai. So we'll see, here's what's interesting. So according to Rav, so we'll say, so just to understand, we still have our major machlokes, right? Our major machlokes, Rabbi say, was about we have two cows. We have the par of Yom Kippur and para aduma. Rav says the par of Yom Kippur can be shechted by a zar, para aduma cannot. Shmuel holds para aduma can be shechted by a zar and par of Yom Kippur cannot. That's the major machlokes. We now are kind of getting into para aduma a little bit, and what we've just established by para aduma is that there is an awareness obligation. An awareness obligation. Namely, you cannot have a lapse of awareness by para aduma. Now, what we just saw by Rav is that the Torah goes out of its way to highlight the awareness obligation by shchita and by sreifa. Now, if the Torah is highlighting the awareness obligation by shchita and by sreifa, that tells you that what? There must be another part of this process where even if you had a lapse of awareness, you have not invalidated the para. So the shaila is, that's the Gemara mai. So what part of the paraduma process are you coming to exclude from the awareness obligation? So sifas afra umilui mayim lekidush. So maybe you're saying that during the collection of the ashes, milui mayim is the filling up of the container with water, and kiddush, Rabbi say kiddush means is the placement of the water on the ashes and then mixing them together. So maybe you're going to say that maybe you don't need complete awareness in any of these steps, right? The gathering of the ashes, the filling up of the container with water, and the mixing of the ashes with the water. That can't be. Amud Beis, why the Gemara says, L'mishmeres l'meini daksid. Both say, what does the word mishmeres mean? Mishmeres, right? Guarding it. So clearly, again, the Torah tells you have to be guarding it. I will say, now, what does guarding mean in this context? Bepashtos, guarding means awareness. Ella lemeuti hashlachas eitz erev ve'ezo v'shnitolas delav gufa deparninu. Rather, I will say what it must be coming to include is what? The adding in of the eitz eres, the cedar wood, the ezov, the hyssop, and the piece of red wool into the fire together. I will say, right, this is all mixed together in the fire. That it must be that halacha l'maisa. This does not require awareness. Then again, I will say, which just means like if you threw these things into the mixture and just we're not concentrating on them, that ultimately again you have not invalidated the para aduma. Now, why would these things not require acute awareness? So the Gemara says, "Delav gufa de para nedu." What does that mean? That I will say maybe the part of the para aduma service that require, unadulterated awareness and concentration is only the actual parts of preparation of the para itself. But what we'll call para aduma accessories. And I will say, what are the para aduma accessories? So that's again, the piece of cedar wood, the piece of red wool, the hyssop. These are the things that are mixed in, but lamaisa, they're not part of the guf of the para itself. So to be clear, should you be concentrating? Should you have concentration on these things? Of course. But if for some reason you got distracted, it would not invalidate the para service. Good. So we'll say that's the end of that sugya. Much, thank you very much. Excellent. So the Gemara says as follows: Itmar. So we'll say. So again, we'll say this is just again. You have to admit. It's partially like a little hard to contain your excitement about these Gemaras. Because why? Because think about this, look what you get. Like you come in, you roll into Yoma, Daf Yomi, and look at the journey we're going on. Yom Kippur, to Para Aduma, to Hara. Look where we've been to in just one day. Right? You've been sitting in your seat, but you've already been in the Beis HaMikdash, you've already been at Hara Mishcha, Hara Zeisim, right? We've been Kache Bedek Abayis, Kache Kaba. Incredible. Itmar. Shchitas Para Bizar. So we'll say, here we go. So now we're kind of let's get back. Let's zone. I know it's so easy. We're talking about not getting distracted. How do you not get distracted in Gemaras like this, right? We're mamish all over the place. Such an exciting way. So let's come back to what we started with. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. I would say that's the primary focus right now. Rav and Shmuel. I know that there are two paros. What are the two paros? Number one, paraduma. Number two, parad Yom Kippur. Good. I also know one of them is Ksheira Bizar, one of them is Psula Bizar. I just don't know which is which. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav will hold that what? Para is Psula Bizar, Yom Kippur is Ksheira Bizar. Shmuel holds just the opposite. Para Aduma is Ksheira Bizar, and ultimately Yom Kippur is Pazar. I will say, of course, the amazing part of this Machlokes is they're darshaning the same, right? It's all the same words. It's all the same, they're just darshaning in different ways. Okay, in any event, Itmar. Shchitas par bizar. What happens if a non-Kohen shechs the para? Right, supposed to remember again, whenever you see para duma is always referred to in the nekeva. The para of Yom Kippur is male. So ultimately, again, the shchitas para bizar. Rabbi Ami Amar Ksher, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar Psula. So both say, Gemara is pointing out, by the way, this machlokis, Rav and Shmuel, is also other machlokis. Other people jump on this machlokis bandwagon. So here you have, if you go ahead and you shech the para, not quite shech the para duma, Rabbi Ami says it's kosher, Rabbi Yitzchak says it's pasul. Ula Amar Kshera, Ula says, if a zar shech the para duma, it's kosher. Va'amrila Psula. Others quote Ula saying that it's pasul. Masiv Rabbi Yoshua bar Abba l'seyuel Rav. So Rabbi Yoshua bar Abba brought up a support Rav. So again, what did Rav say? Rav said that if a zar shechs a paradum, what's the halacha? Psula. It's a 50-50, right? We'll just double check that. Right? Rav said psula, right? Because remember again, Rav said that halacha l'maisa, we learn out Elazar chuka. That was Rav's, that was the original drasha. Elazar chuka, which teaches me again, definition of chuka. If there's one thing you take out of a 7-year cycle, right? Everlasting statute, that's all, right? Right? Because, good, everlasting statute. Roll so nicely off the tongue. So Rabbi Shua comes along and wants to bring a support to Rav. Namely, that para aduma cannot be shafted by a zar, but the para of Yom Kippur can. Ainly Allah hazame meha shen ksherim biisha kibeish. So both say, now the Gemara is digressing to still para aduma, but another discussion. Namely, are there parts of the paraduma service that could be done by a woman? Right? And also in those same lines, are there parts of the paraduma service that could be done at night? So watch this. So it says the Gemara, I only know that the sprinkling of the waters themselves cannot be done by a woman like they are done by a man. Namely, the sprinkling of the water itself must be done by a man and not by a woman. We'll learn where that is from. So the Gemara says, so ultimately again, and furthermore, you can only sprinkle the waters of the paraduma by day. What's very interesting. Even though, now what's the novelty in that? See, the novelty in that is, even though paraduma is not what? Not a carbon. Excellent. Remember, carbonos can only be done by days. Even though, remember again, what is paraduma? What's its status? Good, that's what it is. Correct. It's a process, not a avoda. I'm saying, what's its sanctity? That was excellent, right? But what's its sanctity? Kadshe bedekabayis, right? So let's remember again, it's a process, not a avoda, and therefore by extension, it's kadshe bedekabayis and not kadshe haguf. So therefore again, remember again, karbanos must be done by day. But yet, even though para aduma is not a carbon, it's a process, it's not a avoda, and it's not kadshe aguf, it's kadshe bedek habayis, it still can only be done by day. How do I know that? So the Gemara says, Venkshar el bayom minayin l'rab. So the Gemara says, Venkshar el bayom minayin l'rabos shchitasa v'kabalas dama v'hazaz dama usreifasa v'ashlachas eitz era ve'izo v'shnitalas. How do I know that halacha l'maisa, the other parts as well, namely the shchita of the para, the receiving of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood, the burning of it, the throwing in of the cedar wood, the hyssop, the red wool. How do I know that halacha l'maisa, again, those things can also only be done by a man and only be done by day? Talmud lomar, Torah. Therefore, the Torah says Torah. So look at Rashi, Talmud lomar Torah, zos chukas ha-Torah, Torah achas l'chol abadasa. So we'll say it's interesting. The word chukas teaches me that what? What does the word chukas teach me?
Never to be changed.
Right? Never to be changed. Everlasting statute. Right? That the way I did it the first time is the way it remains forever. Torah teaches me that essentially whatever applies in one aspect of the service applies in all aspects of the service. So once I know that in parts of the service of the para aduma, it can't be done by a woman and it can only be done by day, so Torah teaches me that what? That applies to every aspect of para aduma, namely cannot be done by a woman, it can only be done by day. So the Gemara says, Yochol sha'animar ba'af asifas afra umilu imayim b'kiddush. So I might have thought maybe that also applies to the gathering up of the ashes, the filling up of the receptacle of the kli with water, and kiddush, the mixing together of the water and the ashes. Talmud lomar zos. Therefore, the Torah says zos. Right? Ultimately, again, to teach me that halacha l'maisa only in the previously enumerated avodas, do you have the psul of isha and yom, but not by these. The Gemara says, but one second. Ma ro'is l'rabos es elu, u'l'hotzi es elu. I don't understand. It seems very random. How do you know which? So what the Gemara is essentially saying is like this. This is fascinating, right? So Torah teaches me that whatever applies to some avodos applies to all of the avodos. But yet, Zos teaches me that there are certain avodos that are excluded. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. How do you know what to include in Torah and what to what to include based on the word Torah and what to exclude based on the word Zos? So the Gemara says, so here we go. So we'll say after the Torah goes ahead and is marbes certain things and is miyut. So we'll say here's what I know. There's a ribu and there's a miyut, right? There's an inclusionary word and an exclusionary word. What's the inclusionary word? Torah. What's the exclusionary word? Zos. So look here, just a moment. V'lo piresh my riba umay miyet. Right? So we'll say, this is incredible. After I know that the Torah gives me a word Torah, which includes, Torah gives me an exclusionary word zos, but doesn't tell me what to include and what to exclude. So we'll say, listen to this. So the achar, umaras, I will say, the hotzi eselu, achar shiba kasu v'miyet amrit, hari anu lemeidin kulan mehazos memel. So we'll say, what is the most important part of the paraduma service? What's the most important part? The sprinkling. Which makes sense, right? Because remember again, everything you do for the paraduma, you do for what purpose? For the ability to sprinkle the water. So we'll say, watch this. This is incredible. So just like the sprinkling of the waters are not kshera, can't be done by a woman, but can only be done by a man. By the way, Rashi points out over here, we're going to see this in Rabbi, because the pasuk speaks on when it speaks of sprinkling the water. It says who's going to sprinkle it? An ish tahar. So from here we learn that the sprinkling can only be done by a man and not by a woman. Furthermore, the ein ksherin ella bayom. And the spring, so we'll say, so now, the whole essence of the paraduma, the most important part of the paraduma process is the sprinkling. And by the sprinkling, we establish that it can only A, be done by a man, and B, be done by day. We'll see by day where we learned that from. Afani avi shchitasa, v'kabalas dama, v'hazaz dama, usreifasa, v'ashlachas eitz era ve'ezov, ushnitolas. So I will say, so too, I'll learn out all of these other avodos. Shchita, Kabbalah, receiving of the blood, sprinkling of the blood, burning of the para, throwing of the cedar wood, the hyssop, the red wool, into the fire. Horil ve'in kshirin ela be'isha kela be'ish. Because I will say, here's what I know. All of these avodos are only fit to be done by a man. Why? Because by all of these avodos, the Torah goes out of its way to mention Elazar. Which we learn out from here that all of these enumerated avodas can only be done by a man. Therefore, again, ein ksherin be'isha kibeish. Therefore, ein ksherin ela bayom. And furthermore, they can only be performed by day. Umotzi ani. Therefore, I will exclude from this list asifa safra, the gathering up of the ashes. Milui mayim, the filling up of the receptacle with water. Vikidush, and the mixing of the ashes together with the water. Hoilu kshirin be'isha kibeish. These could technically be done by a woman. We'll say, how do I know that they can be done by a woman? How do I know? What doesn't the Torah say? Elazar or Ish, right? Elazar or Ish. Therefore, I must say, so remember again, once the Torah goes going out of its way to say Elazar and Ish, I have to read into the fact that when the Torah doesn't say Elazar and Ish, then it's coming to tell me that what? That it can be done by a woman. So all of these avodas that we just mentioned, the gathering of the ashes, the filling up of the kli with water, the mixing of the ashes with the water, those are fit to be done by women just like by men. So therefore, again, ksherin nami bayom ba'layla. Therefore, I would also assume that what? They're also fit to be performed at night. At night. The Gemara says, v'hai maiti yufta. But ultimately, again, what is the refutation being advanced over here? To which the Gemara says, v'hai maiti yufta, ilema, midi psulin bi'isha, psulin nami bizar. So maybe you're supposed to say, remember again, why is this whole thing being brought up? Right? So remember, you both say this is not our topic. What's our topic? Our topic is the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. And what's the machlokes Rav and Shmuel? What's the machlokes? What's the machlokes? I have two paros, right? Paraduma, par Yom Kippur. Rav says paraduma must be done by a Kohen. Shchita k'ser b'zar. Yom Kippur can be done by a zar. Shmuel, paraduma can be done by a zar. Yom Kippur cannot. We're trying to bring this whole thing as a proof to Rav. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. So what's the refutation over here? So maybe you're going to tell me like this. Maybe I will say the raya is like this. Oh, this is riveting. Maybe the raya is like this. The assumption is anything that can't be done by a woman also can't be done by who? A non-Kohen. In other words, I will say that in this context, it's not just the woman who's being excluded. Essentially, a woman represents anyone who's not what? A non-Kohen. And the fact that a woman can't do the shchita also tells me that a zar can't do the shchita. Oh, that's a proof for Rav. Rav holds that halacha l'maisa by para aduma shchita kshera bezar. Made the psulin b'isha psulin nami bezar. To which the Gemara says not necessarily, because hazas me'mea tochiach, because what's the sprinkling of the waters will prove that that's not necessarily the case. Shepsulin b'isha uksherin bizar. Both said we're going to learn this dramatic idea that the sprinkling of the waters cannot be done by a woman, but technically speaking, can be done by a non-Kohen. So I will say, interestingly, if we look at Rashi, actually we have to go to Rashi. So the Gemara says over here, so you see, by the way, that women and zar are not equal. So you can have a situation where something cannot be done by a woman, but can be done by a zar. Amar Abai, Hayit Yufte. I'll tell you the refutation. Isha, my timer. But say, why is it that a woman cannot do the aforementioned avodos by para aduma? Very simple. Elazar velo Isha. Because I will say, in all of the avodos where we disqualified a woman, what does the Torah say? Elazar. Elazar. So what do I learn from Elazar? Elazar velo Isha. Oh, you know what the corollary drasha to that is? You know what the corollary drasha is? So the Gemara says, Zar nami Elazar velo zar. We'll say, which was the drasha of Rav. Remember again, Rav had a two-pronged drasha. What is two-pronged drasha? Two words. Chuka and Elazar. So therefore, again, the Gemara is just going in and supporting Rav's position. The Gemara now, we'll say now here, the Gemara is phrasing it legabe ultimately Isha, to say that Elazar excludes Isha. The Gemara is just saying, by the way, the same Elazar which excludes Isha also excludes Zar. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Zar nami Elazar v'lo Zar. Amar Ula, kol parsha kula mashma motzi miyad. Mashma motzi miyad mashma umashma. So we'll say this is great. This is really, we'll say I just want to point out something amazing. Just so you sit back, you appreciate this. You know, the Ribono Shel Olam could have given. Kosh Baruch Hu could do anything. We all agree with that. Good, excellent, good. Right. So let's say Kosh Baruch Hu could have given us a Torah that was much more explicit. Right, we're handling all of this stuff over here. Right, Isha Azaksha. Why don't you just say it? Why don't you just say it, right? Torah is pretty long. Just add in a couple of additional psukim. I don't know, whatever. Just put it in there. Well, so you see from here how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to toil in Torah. You see, because at the end of the day, the only things you really acquire in life are the things you have to work for. We all know this from our personal lives. The things you've had to work very hard for are the things that are really yours and the things that you are truly וקנה. And it's the same thing with Torah. The Torah that's spoon-fed to you is very nice, okay? It's beautiful, it's nice, it's enjoyable, it's fun. And then, but you're not really וקנה. But when you have to work at something, so we'll say, so again, yes, of course, the Rebbe Shalom could have given us all of the halachos of para aduma neatly arranged in perfect order, and it would have read through a psukim. But then I wouldn't have been koneh. Think about this. By the end of today, in just a few moments, is it 8:54 already? Oh my gosh. Okay, so in 15 minutes when we have to stop. So again, just understand, you walk away from a daf like this, and like, back and forth, Chuka, Elazar, Chuka, Ara, Isha, Zar, and suddenly again, this para aduma, which Eretz Hashem we're all going to have to partake in when Mashiach comes. One of the first things we're going to have to do is all of us are going to have to undergo, even the Kohanim are going to have to undergo the para aduma process, because we all have Tumas Meis. But now I'm koneh it. I walk. It's incredible. All right, so let's go back there. Says the Gemara. I will say now here, interestingly enough, let's at least begin this sugya. So the Gemara says as follows. Comes along, Amar Ula. Ula really highlights the difficulty in this sugi. He says, Kol parsha kula. This entire parsha paraduma, mashma motzi miyad mashma or mashma meila. So we'll say, Ula really captures this. In paraduma, some of the psukim seem to go ahead and undermine or exclude that which was stated before, and some of the psukim are just to be understood as written. So Ula is really capturing a little bit of the tension that we're feeling with these psukim. Because I will say, on one hand, sometimes Elazar Chuka comes to limit, sometimes it's not a limit, sometimes it is a limit. So watch this, I will say. Here we go. We're going to go through now the Parsha Paraduma and at least begin. Unesatem osa el Elazar HaKohen. You shall go ahead and give it to Elazar HaKohen. So we'll say, so the pasuk says this is about the paraduma. You'll give the paraduma to Aaron HaKohen, and ultimately again he will take it out to shecht it. So the Gemara says, Osa le'elazar, v'lo ledoros le'elazar. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, it says, V'nasata osa, you will give it to Elazar, which can be darshaned how to say that what? It's only the first para aduma that requires Elazar HaKohen. But future paros can be done by who? Can be done by who? Maybe anyone. Now, I say that even that, who's anyone? Well, who is Elazar? Who is Elazar? Elazar was the Skan Kohen Gadol. So what does that mean? That it's only the first paraduma that has to be done by the Skan Kohen Gadol, but ultimately, again, any subsequent para can be done by anyone else? Or maybe it's saying that no, that ultimately, again, the first paraduma had to be done by a Kohen, but any subsequent para can be done by anyone. So it's not clear. So the Gemara says, O Salah Elazar, V'Lodoros Elazar. Ikadamri. Others say, Doros Bekohen Gadol. We'll say, so some say what that means is, the first paraduma could be done by the Skan, but future paros had to be done by who? By the Kohen Gadol. It's incredible. And I will say, others say, Amri, L'doros b'Kohen Hedyo. No, others say, no. The first paraduma had to be done by the Skan, but future paras can be done by who? Can be done by who? By any regular Kohen. So Bishlam L'doros b'Kohen Hedyo, Shapir. So it was according to the approach that says, future kavanos can be done even by a Kohen Hedyo. That makes sense. Right? The Torah is saying the first para has to be done by the Skan, but future paras can be done by the Hedyot. Elaman Amar. The Doros the Kohen Gadol minale, but according to the opinion who says that future generations the paraduma has to be done by the Kohen Gadol, where do they get that from? Kamar chuka miyom kippurim. Wow. Make a gzir shava chuka by Yom Kippur. Right? The boss say, remember again, by Yom Kippur it says chuka, and whose name is associated with Yom Kippur? Aaron. To teach me again, chuka by Yom Kippur teaches me that for all generations the avodah of Yom Kippur must be done by the Kohen Gadol. So some want to suggest, amazingly enough, that although the first paraduma was done by Elazar, that was a first-time thing. But going forward, chuka teaches me that Allah l'maisa paraduma must be done by the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara says, I v'hotzi osa. So I will say, what does that mean? V'hotzi osa. You shall take out the part. So if I will say, that's number one machlokes, right? Amazing. Number one machlokes. We're going to go in the Rambam when we get to the end of the sugi tomorrow. We'll go through all these halachas. But machlokes number one is, everyone agrees that in year one, first paraduma ever performed, who did it? Elazar, Skan Kohen Gadol. Machlokes says future generations who has to do it. Is it even a Kohen Hedyot? Or is it dafka the Kohen Gadol? Okay, next machlokes, your next discussion. The Gemara says, "V'hotzi osa." When taking out the paraduma, you have to take out the paraduma itself. Shelo yotzi acheres ima. You cannot take out another para with the para aduma. And Rabbi will say, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up. We'll say again, Samir Tashem tomorrow. We're going to still be in paraduma. It's incredible. At least for the beginning, we have a new Mishnah tomorrow as well. I'll say the exciting journey just continues day after day. Shkar Chabosai. Have a great day. Have a great day, everyone. I think it makes a big difference when you shut it off. What? Makes a difference when you shut it off. Yeah. I think so, right?
It's easier for you. Did the microphone help feel like it helped out?
Yeah.